This week, we welcome back one of our most popular returning guests, the creator of The Secret Sun, the one and only Christopher Knowles Fraser. Welcome back, sir. How are you?
I'm great. How can I not be great with that kind of introduction? So,
Absolutely. Well, we by the time this comes out, it'll be birthday season for both of us. So this can be a
yes,
birthday special episode.
yes. When the sun enters Cancer, yes,
Exactly. So, which is also, I mean, synchromistically or at least mythically resonant because we are moving into a little bit more of that Isis rising, Sirius rising time of year. So, you finally wrote that book, sir. You finally wrote the book many of us were hoping for, a Synchromysticism guide.
yes.
Well done.
A user's manual, yes, sir.
Mm.
Finally, I was threatening to do so for many years, and you were encouraging me to do so, and I finally took the plunge. Finally needed to be done. I wish I had gotten it out a little earlier, to be honest with you, but you
No, it's
gotta.
good, and it's exactly what I expected it to be in the sense of, and we'll talk about this over the course of the episode. The practice is there are a few practices, and funnily enough, I think sigil magic is kind of like it, where it looks simple and it looks like, what is this wacky little hobby you have? Until you sit with the implications of it working, and you're like, wait a minute, wait a minute. And
Yeah,
the book has that beautiful expansion up from like the tactics to, well, this stuff works. So think about what kind of universe you're living in if that is true.
exactly true. It seems like a little silly parlor game until reality starts to get all fungible on you, starts to get a little squishy, And I always say that when you play with synchronicity, it starts to play with you, and a lot of people can't handle that. So that's one of the impetuses behind writing the book is that I want to give people a guide because as trivial as it might seem to people, synchromysticism can drive people insane. And I've seen
Yeah,
it happen.
absolutely.
I've
Yeah.
seen it happen. And the real, the number one tactic that you need to wield is learning to separate signal from noise and learning to, first of all, learning to define what synchronicity is. I mean, people have all sorts of crazy definitions for it. But to me, there are also different levels of synchronicity. I mean, the classic synchronicity is the Jungian idea of like, it's basically prophecy. You have a dream of a bird and an unusual bird or something. You go outside and it's perched on the branch above your car in the morning. So, I mean, that to me, that classic Jungian synchronicity, I'm more and more starting to see as psi,
Hmm.
see as clairvoyance, foreknowledge, whatever terminology you want to use. But there are other levels of synchronicity. There are synchronicities that transcend your own personal reality being mirrored in external reality. And that's something that I try to concentrate on a lot because with the rise of constant mediation, I think we need to learn to do that and also learn to outsmart all the algorithms that are eventually going to figure out what we're doing and start to play with us and start to try to manipulate it, keep one step ahead of them, let's say.
Yeah, exactly. I want to pick that back up in a moment, but we were just talking about definitions. So you, what I liked about the book is that you, it's almost like a DEFCON system, but there's like different gradations of phenomena that you can encounter. So do you stick to the like Jung Pauli definition of synchronicity? Like what are you using to, if we're at a cocktail party and you make the mistake, or I make the mistake of asking what you do, and you say, "Oh, I'm a synchromistic. I actually just wrote a book about it." Like, what? Okay, I've talked to the crazy person. How do you define synchro? Because most people will know synchronicity, or they think they do. So,
Mm.
in that situation, what's your like pithy 1 to 2 sentence definition of synchronicity before you hit them with the real stuff?
Well, like I said, I mean, it's an interior thought or dream or notion becoming mirrored in time in a significant time, but also a significant coincidence. The thing I say is that coincidences are a dime a dozen, but synchronicity is also a dime a dozen. It's also
True.
becoming more and more common in people's lives because we have greater data sets to work from.
Yeah.
We have more experience, and also we have this weird phenomenon of social media companies apparently reading our minds with some sort of cosmo demonic AI manifest whatever algorithm. I don't know. You see this all the time. It's like, oh, I was thinking of something and it showed up in my Facebook feed. People say that all the time. And what are the implications of that? I don't think I want to know. So, like I said, I mean, this is something that we need to learn to counteract. But also, I define different types of synchronicity: the personal, the factual, and the temporal. Okay. And the temporal is when things happen simultaneously in time, and they don't have to have anything to do with you. It's something that you observe or that you record. It's not something that has to involve you personally. And then the factual is like, strange facts that we hear all the time that line up in the classic cases. It's actually a bit dodgy and a bit apocryphal, but the whole idea of like Lincoln and Kennedy being linked through time by having like, you know, Lincoln had a secretary named Kennedy and Kennedy had a secretary named Lincoln, things like that. I mean, all these kinds of things that, cracked, made a lot of money doing listicles of back in the day, right? But also, the thing that I've described is that I think synchromysticism as an art, like I had been doing it back in the early 90s before it had a name. Okay. I didn't even know the name. I don't even know how I would describe it, to be honest with you, just as synchronicity, not synchromysticism. But it was really in the wake of 9/11 and all the, the foreshadowings and the Easter eggs, let's just call them, of 9/11 before the fact. And that became almost like a cottage industry on the internet of people sort of recording these things and making, early YouTube or pre-YouTube videos of and so on and so forth. So it's a multi-layered thing. And really the challenge for me with working with synchronicity is just keeping the information organized in a rational but also a functional way, if that makes sense. A way that you can organize in a way that you just don't sound like that crazy person at the party and just start, hey, did you know this happened and then that happened and this happened, and people like, please, no, thank you. But also so you can keep it organized. And I don't want to get too scientific about it. Let me just say that. I mean, I think there is a scientific aspect, or you can approach it scientifically, but it is still an art form to me.
Yeah.
But it's also a form of mysticism, because the more you work with synchronicity and the more you see all these things start to coalesce and line up and connect, it changes the way you perceive reality.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, maybe not to the same degree that like a magical practice does, but you've said in the past that you thought synchromysticism was a magical practice anyway.
Oh, no, it definitely is. It definitely is. Yeah.
And it's classified as a subset of chaos magic on Wikipedia. So, I mean, I don't think of it that way at all. I think of it as mystical, but
well, so funny enough, because I'm sure people are going to ask you more about definitions of synchronicity. I was thinking as I was putting the questions together, what's your definition of mysticism, if that's the case?
Well, there's the dictionary definition of mysticism, but there's also, for me, like how do I practice it and how do I perceive it? And to me, it's a case of openness, like a radical form of openness, I think is the best way that I could personally describe it. It's opening up, vibing, putting your antenna up, whatever kind of metaphor people use, but it's tuning in to things outside of yourself. There's this whole concept, there's this whole misperception that mysticism is like navel gazing and it's solipsistic and so on. And it can be in some regards, but I think I think it should be the opposite. Let's
Yeah.
just say. I think it should be the opposite. It should be about getting out of yourself, getting out of your head, getting out of your ego, getting out of your problems, and tuning in to what's going on around you. And the natural world is a huge, huge part of that for me. I know you've described me as an animist in some regards. I mean, I see
You
myself
went through
more.
an animist phase. Come on now. You were saying the same thing on those night walks. Don't
Well,
make it about me.
well, to me that's well, I mean, I guess nature mysticism and animism are probably synonymous in that
Yeah. Well, so
regard.
you started the definition with an opening up, and I wrote down mine in the context of what I think mysticism is when it comes to probably most things, but definitely synchromysticism. And mine's a little bit more Ned Flanders, but it's the same thing. It's like opening up to the awareness that God is speaking to your soul. Like it's it's an opening up, right? Like that's especially when it comes to the synchromysticism part of it, because you're playing a game of signs and portents with the cosmos, right? Like, and that's an opening up. That's an opening up to this, like, and why I phrase it that way because as far as I can tell, God, whatever that is always talking to your soul, whatever that is, and it falls to you to like open up to that awareness. And there's a turn in that direction, I think, in synchromysticism.
There absolutely is. Because, what I say in the introduction is that in the ancient days, they called synchromysticism the study of signs and wonders.
Yeah,
I'm sure the Hermeticists had their own definition of that. I mean, this is not new. You know what I
no,
mean? This is, and to me, it's an ancient practice, but it's been sort of turbocharged by the internet and
yeah,
so on. I mean, really, just one more thing. I mean, my practice of synchromysticism, like I said, started in the early 90s, maybe even the 80s. I'd have to really sort of think about it. But I started writing all this stuff down in the early 90s. But it was really in the wake of 9/11 that, I and many others got the boost. But at the same time, 9/11 went down. I've told you that I was working in the city. I should have been there that day. My daughter was 2 weeks old at that, no, 3 weeks old at that point in time. I just gotten a new EMAC, the old EMAX, right, which had a 55K modem, and I thought I was like, it was, like a rocket ride. And Google was good. Google was still useful. Google
yeah.
still gave you results rather than advertisements and propaganda. I mean, Google used to be great,
It
and
really
I
did.
couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done it without Google. But before I really got started with Google, which was in 2001, because it wasn't very, somebody had referred me to it in like 2099, somewhere around there. And I worked with it, and they hadn't really gotten the algorithms down. It was really kind of a little haphazard. Kind of reminded me of Alta Vista, just a little bit more complete. But I was doing it old school, man. I was going to the library. I was like card catalogs and encyclopedias and pulling out stuff. But a lot of that was because, all this information that I was starting to gather, I couldn't I couldn't accept the reality of it. I needed multiple forms of corroboration so I could believe it myself. I had to convince myself that this was real. That was my first target, right? It was myself. It's like, how can this be real? This is insane. What's going on here? This is crazy. This stuff is just piling up and piling up. And I had to convince myself. So once I did that, it was, convincing other people was a breeze.
Yeah. We got some interesting origin stories, like that's the origin of the practice and so on. But I'm unaware if I wasn't sure I knew the origin story completely of the Secret Sun, which is also in the book, which I thought was interesting.
Well, the Secret Sun started, the whole idea of the Secret Sun started, it had a strange start. Um, and this is an interesting story too. So I got a contract to do a mini series for Sirius Entertainment. Talk about
Hmm.
synchronicity, right? Sirius Entertainment, and they had an imprint called Dogstar, to do this series called Halo and Angel Story. And what they had this whole conceit that everybody had to, like they were the publisher, but everybody had their own imprints. And like, well, you got to think up of a name for an imprint. And I'm like, oh. what am I going to do? And I was thinking about these dreams that I'd had since I was a kid where the sun's out in the middle of the night. Like the sun's out 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, but only certain people know about it. But there's also like this whole idea of like liminal spaces, like swamps and so on. So I'm sitting on the PATH train at 33rd Street, seriously, synchromistic to the hilt, right? And I'm thinking about that dream, and somebody had who is the chap who wrote 100 Years of Solitude? The
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
the was it Gabriel
Garcia. Yeah,
Marquez?
yeah, yeah. We know it's in the next room, actually.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah,
it's Gabriel Garcia. So somebody had a Spanish edition of a book of his,
yeah.
and it had this like depiction of like an eclipse or something. I don't know. It was an interesting design. And I kind of looked at it, and as I looked at it, like the term Secret Sun popped into my head. So, and I just started using it as like a branding exercise from then on. But I'll tell you the way it really started. And this is a story. I don't know how many times I've shared this story, but there was a guy who was sort of like a proto-synchromistic, this sort of Christian conspiracy guy named David Flynn. Are you familiar with David Flynn?
No.
He wrote Cydonia. Um, he wrote a thing on Cydonia, and then he did a thing on Isaac Newton, and he
Okay.
did really interesting work. He passed away in 2012, unfortunately. But he did this. He started this website, and if you go on archive.org, you can still find it called Having Mulder's Baby. All right.
Oh, I remember the website. Okay, yeah. So
So he
yeah.
started this thing called Having Mulder's Baby, and I checked it out literally every day for years. And he did a couple little tiny little updates, but he never explored this idea. And I'm like, come on, I want to hear this. What are you talking about? Let's go. Let's do this thing. So finally I said, you know what, I'm going to do this myself. And I did this whole thing on all the Egyptian mystery symbolism with the whole abduction of Mulder and his death and rebirth and everything. It was all very Osirian. But I went back and realized that was like baked into the X-Files from day one. You know, you had Persephone with Samantha, of course, Samantha, and then you had Scully's abduction. So she's another Persephone. I mean, Chris Carter was always playing with all this,
Hmm.
particularly Eleusinian, Egyptian, all this mystery symbolism. So basically, I went and I did this whole huge thing on it. And I posted on a bunch of X-Files boards. People were digging it. And then I sent it to Frank Spotnitz, who is the co-producer, co-executive producer of the X-Files. And he posted it on his blog. He had this company called Big Light at the time, and he posted on his blog, and I was like, okay, if I pass muster, if my synchromystic kung fu pass muster with this guy, I think I'm going to pursue this. And it was after that I started working on the book that became Our Gods Wear Spandex.
Hmm.
Okay, so it was after I got this little boost in confidence, right? Oh, hey, maybe I should pursue this, that I did this huge thing. And it was mostly about science fiction film. And then that sort of got broken up into two parts with the science fiction film and the comics. And the comics was the one that sold, that I got the contract for with Red Wheel Weiser, right? And I needed to promote the book. So I started The Secret Sun, or I basically parked it in 2006. And I started, but I didn't do anything. And then I started posting in earnest to promote Our Gods Wear Spandex. I mean, that was really the impetus of it. And I didn't intend to just keep
Hmm.
going and going. I thought it was just going to be like a little venue for me to do a little spiel for my book before I went and got a proper full-time job. And here we are today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I
When
mean,
I first
it
encountered it,
started 20 years ago, and
yeah.
then here
Wow.
we are.
Yeah. When I first encountered it in London, my first thought, and like the dream experience you had as a child of the sun being out in the middle of the night and not that many people knowing about it, that's an underworld vision. That's an Egyptian underworld or a Greek underworld vision, right? Because that's where the sun goes at night.
Correct.
It goes underneath the earth and it shines in a night realm and then it comes back. So you're like, and then, X-Files, as you say, it's very much that um, catabasis, anabasis, like in and out of the underworld kind of thing. So it's archetypally significant that the secret sun is literally the sun that shines in the underworld, like the imaginal, the unconscious, the hidden. It like that's, I thought, somebody might have referred it to me when it was early rune soup in the UK. Somebody might have referred it to me, and I thought initially, oh, secrets, like that's what I thought it was. I'm like, oh, we're dealing with like another magic blog because the sun behind the sun, or the sun in the underworld. It's like I get where they're going with that symbolism, and I mean, it is a magic blog, and it's a, well, definitely. As far as my definition of magic is concerned, you just don't do any, like, thelemic sex pestery. So yeah.
Thank God. No, well, people have always said, oh, is this supposed to be Saturn? Is this supposed to be Sirius? I mean, all these weird interpretations. And I think they're always disappointed when I tell them. And I'm glad that you appreciate the significance of that, because people are always disappointed when I tell them, no, is about this dream I had when I was very young, and it recurred through my entire life that the sun comes out. But like I said, there's also motifs of like traveling through the swamps, like wetlands, like liminal spaces. But also part of the Secret Sun dreams are there's this hidden suburban neighborhood in Manhattan. Like, so it is all like very much subconscious, unconscious, all this kind of symbolism. It is very Jungian, but all these motifs were established before I had any idea who Jung was, because I was like 5 years old when I started these dreams. So there you go.
All right. It's interesting that people ask, is it Saturn and so on? Because one of the things I liked about the book, and you sort of touched on it earlier about it being a science, and the biggest tip being to essentially maintain rigor. I'm going to give, because it tied in really well last week. That's right. Last week's guest, last week's guest was Professor Shaw, who wrote this book, Galenic Tantra, which is the best book I've read here until I read yours. And I read my Iamblichus early on in my magical career on the mysteries, because you go through a phase coming out of lodge magic systems where you look at the Iamblichus Porphyry split, Porphyry saying you can do it all in your head, and Iamblichus saying, no, you need ceremony. And you read it and you go, Iamblichus is correct, moving on. Professor Shaw has this correct and powerful thesis that, particularly with the Iamblichus, it's not a escape of reality. It's not an escape of the body. You're actually pulling the God in and expressing. And so, reading it this way, just in the week before reading your book, or actually before we get to the necessity for rigor, what I saw this time that I missed 15, 20 years ago, because when you read Neoplatonism, it sounds like good. But I'm going to read quotes that are now contextualized in the context of Chris saying, when it comes to synchromysticism, you need rigor and safeguards so that you don't drive yourself insane, but also that some of the stuff, it has to come from the universe, it can't come from you. Here we go back to 305 AD, to Iamblichus on the imagination. The imaginative faculty is divinely inspired, since it is roused into modes of imagination from the gods, not from itself, and is utterly removed from what is ordinarily human. I'm going to give you another one. So Iamblichus says that his patron was Hermes in his arguments, right? And he meant it in a, I would almost say, a synchromistic way. It is fitting that Hermes is the patron of Iamblichus, for in the Greek pantheon, Hermes reveals the divine will to human beings, yet Hermes is also a trickster and a liar. According to Plato, Hermes is the god of speech who makes all things and makes them circulate. Yet he is, as Plato says, twofold, true and false. What does this twofold revelation mean? Iamblichus, Proclus, and the Platonist Theurgus were not naive. They did not think their visions of the gods were literally true, yet at the same time, without these images, they would have been cut off from the gods. Proclus explains the appearance of gods in divination as an exemplification of the two-way mirror. He uses Dr. Kreipel's two-way mirror thing well in this book. Anyway, the gods themselves are incorporeal, but since those who see them possess bodies, the visions which issue from the gods to worthy recipients possess a certain quality from the gods who send them, but also derive something from those who see them. This is why the gods are seen yet not seen at all. In fact, those who see the gods witness them in the luminous garment of their souls. This is more that you go, okay, they mean the imagination there, but come on now, right? Since the visions have physical extension and appear in the same kind of atmosphere, they are akin to those who see them. This is why the ineffable symbols of the gods, expressed through images, are projected sometimes in one form and sometimes in another. Imagination transforms the invisible into appearances. The imagination, therefore, creates images that are simultaneously are and are not the ineffable. To forget the are not is to worship an idol shaped by personal experience. To forget the are is to live without depth in a world whose meaning is reducible to physical causes. The Hermetic art requires heightened receptivity coupled with an acute faculty of discrimination. Theurgists experience both sides of the mirror simultaneously. The are and the are not are of their visions. Proclus, so like, if you read through, which I needed Professor Shaw to do, the Neoplatonic goop, Iamblichus and Proclus basically wrote your book. So you're plagiarizing them 1700 years later.
Well, I have a confession to make. While I was working on this book, I was doing a lot of reading on the Neoplatonists.
Cool.
I mean, I can't say that they directly inspired anything in the text itself because all the ideas that I express, I've been mulling over for quite some time.
Of course.
But my attention sort of wandered over to the Neoplatonists, and it probably will wander back. This is a summer that I want to do a lot of study. I want to do a lot of reading. I sort of want to get back to my love affair with books.
Yeah, cool.
Do
I
a lot
recommend
less.
Hellenic Tantra, and yeah, it's fantastic. So,
But the Neoplatonists were like very high on my list to do some studying up on. So I don't know if that's a synchronicity, but it feels that way to me.
Well, what I said to Professor Shaw, like whenever these things happen, I come back to Terence McKenna. If it's real, it can take the pressure. So what I saw reading through Iamblichus this time, because I read Hellenic Tantra, and then I went and picked up the really cheap copy of On the Mysteries that I got in Glastonbury. And this time, having gone to the jungle and had these various initiations and so on, and knowing more about the Aboriginal Australian thought world, it's not the right thing to say that they're all talking about the same thing, but they are all describing a thing that is real. So I read Iamblichus, and it's clear to me now, because he's talking about humans have this capacity to interact with the spirit world on an interior basis, some of which is the gods, some of which isn't, and part of the practice is discerning which is which. And when you know that he's saying that, the book it doesn't read like waffle. It's actually as precise as it can possibly be, because if he brings it down to the next level of you need to look for star shapes, and you need to look for a woman with horns, and you need to, it's like, once you've done that, you've broken it, because that's not the universal. The universal is that the stuff that's in there is like the gods talking to you through imagistic capacities, and you have the capacity to receive, to listen, and it's as precise as that. And anyway, I just wanted to share that before we get into like the necessary rigor that comes with this process.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because getting back to how would I define mysticism, and I think an important part of mysticism, not, literally so, but listening, taking in, opening up, letting things come in, you know what I mean? Not trying to enforce your will in a sort of Crowleyan, Nietzschean kind of fashion, right? But just letting things happen. But it takes I think it takes a lot of confidence, first of all, but it takes a lot of humility.
Yep.
Also as well. I mean, these are lessons that have come the hard way for me.
One of the things that I think we miss not really having teachers anymore, because going through the book, and I'm going to get to some precise stuff, I was reminded the first time I taught the Sigil Magic course, which is the first course the membership did, there were sufficiently few members that I could check everyone's homework on like a weekly and daily basis. Give me your sigil statements, send them to me, and I would look at them. And there was a thing that happened where people would diminish the sigil statements so that they would become things that they were sure were going to happen. Because, and I'd email back going, you don't think magic is real yet. Like, you don't think that actually the cosmos will respond to your intentionality and to your imagination. And when I look at the things that you tell people not to do, and it's, oh God, like just so on point, like no gematria, no numerology, no, none of this stuff. It's because the people who, and it's just a beginner thing. It's a, you have to have a teacher or someone who's further down the path to say, listen, relax. Like the universe will do it. Just fucking wait. All right. And instead, people are like, oh, this is vibing for me. I'm going to try and force the connection. I'm going to try and force the meaning. So, like, oh, this happened on 17th Street, or I had the 1 and the 7 together. I get an 8, which is a completion in a bagua. And like, there was a Chinese restaurant around the corner. Like, break, break, break. Right. And I know why you go to such trouble in the book of like, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, because it's not being grumpy. It's like, no, literally, there's a confidence thing. Just trust, wait and trust, and it unfolds.
Well, that's why I say, I mean, don't force it is probably, if people are going to take away one message from the book, I would say don't force it is the most important. Wait, because the answer will always come.
Yeah.
And if you try to force the answer, you're not going to get the correct input that you really need to move forward, if that makes sense. And things like, it's funny. I don't want to put people down who study numerology or gematria, any of these kind of things. But you know what? The feeling I get, and I've always sort of gotten from them, is it reminds me of something like a trick, like a magic trick in like an old arcade or something.
Oh yeah,
it's like all this kind of like, vaudeville, 50s sci-fi, all this sort of like low culture, trash culture. Of course, Philip K. Dick says the divine will speak to us through the trash stratum, right? But it's almost like a different kind of trash stratum.
Yeah.
It's like it's a trash stratum that has pretensions to magic and the mystic when it really all is just tricks. And when I see people working with gematria, the thing that bothers the hell out of me is the way they just torture language so they can get those numbers.
Yeah. So those two. So numerology, as people typically will come to you or me with it, and it's a beginner practice. Like it's in the sense that this is a 19th century boardwalk like thing where you trick people out of money. It's like, oh, your lover's name is Bethany. Well, let me like, and cool to some extent. Gematria is a little bit better, except in unskilled hands, it's you have to mush the language to get the numbers to work. And this is a bigger. So one of the things there's a powerful metaphysical significance to this, I think. And I want to ask, it's not in the book because it's a useful manual and this would be a book in and of itself. One of the things you say is like, when it comes to symbol stats, find one that you resonate with and stay in your lane. That's one thing. And there's something about that and the whole like, oh no, hang on. We'll do that one second. I want to stay because I have a final definition for you when it comes back to the numbers, and then we move to like useful techniques. And one of the things a detractor will say is that this is pareidolia. Now, and the thing is, pareidolia is a useful technique inside chaos magic. So, and I think it's the forcing. This is how I split synchromysticism off from pareidolia. Synchromysticism is lean back. It's like it's lean back. It's not yang. It's yin, right? Pareidolia is lean forward. Pareidolia is forcing it, and actually, you can get some stuff by forcing it. Like that's what Pete Carroll has. He makes pareidolia a goddess in one of his books, and it's like you can deliberately send yourself insane and get some results out of it. And that would be I'm on 17th Street. I added 1 and 7 together. 8 is a bagua mirror. Around the corner is a Chinese restaurant. I'm going to go in there. The woman serving me was named Jane. Jane is my mother's name. Like you can play these games and actually get results out of them. But that's not what this is. So what do you think to my definition that pareidolia is, I don't want to say when you get synchromysticism wrong, but when you force it versus when you wait for the universe?
Well, pareidolia is entirely subjective.
Sure.
I mean,
that's true.
It has, there's no objective standard for it. But I think the watchword is significance. So, you talk about, it's 17th Street and the 1 + 7. When people start adding and subtracting, it drives me crazy.
Yes.
I'm sorry. But like, are these things, okay, these things are coincidences. Like I said, coincidences are a dime a dozen. Synchronicities are a dime a dozen. And that's why I have this ascending scale of significance. How significant is this? How is this life-changingly significant? Or is this just like, oh, isn't this cool? Isn't this, like the whole parlor game aspect that people tend to focus on? And my thinking is like, you want to go for the gusto. You want to go to the stuff that is going to just rock your world, that is going to completely change the way you see reality, is going to completely change the way you see your life and the life of the people around you. I mean, all of that. And all these things that people will dismiss as pareidolia, you tend to notice that they're not very significant. They're almost kind of trivial. You know what I mean? But that's a beginner's thing. But everybody's going to begin somewhere. I
Exactly.
don't want to be judgmental against people who get bad results or use numerology or gematria. I mean, I don't think they should, but you got to start. You need a toehold.
Yeah.
You're entering a very strange new world. You need a toehold. You need to find out the lay of the land. And sometimes you need to start at the beginning. You know what I mean?
But this
So,
comes back to what you was like a couple of things. When you find a symbol set or a technique system that works for you, stick with it and don't
mm,
start with tarot and then add in a little bit of I Ching, and then like don't like
mm,
and I think this is significant. I really think one of the things when I was doing research on lucid dreaming about 20 years ago was that people who uh, would game for more than 5 hours a day, couldn't lucid dream, and actually kind of lost all dream recall. Like lengthy gaming impacts your dreaming. And I had this idea that, like, well, because you've taught the brain or the mind that this is the imaginal world, and it can only handle one at a time. Like it's like methadone, right? Like you've given them methadone instead of the real thing. And there's something, it's not exactly that, but there's something about the fact that it works better. Like if you vibe with like the tarot, the major trumps, like start there. If you're good at gematria, start there. You will probably blend into synchromysticism rather than so start in gematria and end up in it, right? But there's something I think significant about how humans or the cosmos works that so for instance, you wouldn't typically move between human languages when doing synchromysticism, like, oh, well, actually, this word in Persian means this, and then I'm going to jump to Japanese, and it's the same. Like, why? But like, it's just a feeling, but it's an important one as to why that wouldn't work. Does that make sense? What do you think?
oh, it totally makes sense. And it's something that has driven me crazy for many years. There are two examples that I'd like to bring up. Brian, are you familiar with oblique
Of
strategies?
course.
Okay, so one of the oblique strategies is interpret your weakness, or interpret your limitations as a hidden strength. So work within the limitations, because limitations focus the mind, they focus the imagination, and I believe they focus this subconscious process that is an important and integral part of synchronicity. So work within those limitations. And I just discovered this incredible artist. His name escapes me at the time, but he's on Instagram, and he's like a machine. He just sits there and starts doing little lines, and then all of a sudden he's got something that looks like a hologram. I mean, it's just insane. And he says he uses six colors
Wow.
of paint to do like the most insane holographic hyper real stuff you've ever seen in your life. And he does it like so casually and just like it's got to be some sort of savant mechanism going on. But I think that the strength of the artwork comes from these limitations. He goes, okay, these are my colors. What do I do now? And the subconscious mind starts to solve problems for you.
Yeah.
Do you
Okay.
understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It starts to come up with solutions and ideas and innovations that you wouldn't be thinking about if you just had like a bunch of paints all over the place and you're like couldn't decide, do I want red ochre or do I want brown ochre? Do I want yellow gold or do I want gold yellow? I mean, all these kind of things that tend to just completely sidetrack you. This is something, and this is another example from that I brought up is that He was talking about how these synthesizers, these digital synthesizers that have 10 trillion sounds in them, get you absolutely nowhere. Because I
Yeah.
saw this for myself. I remember when I was a musician, I was working with this guy, and he was always buying new equipment. And all we do is just, we're supposed to be recording, we're supposed to be rehearsing, doing whatever. And all we do is just scrolling through all these menus all night. It was absurd. It just got to be ridiculous. And Eno said, conversely, that if you have a Fender guitar, a Fender Stratocaster guitar, which has only got like 3 or 4 sounds, but they're all good, useful sounds. I all these concepts that I took from other cultures outside of synchronicity or outside of Jungian thought or whatever you choose to define it as really helped me. And focus was a huge one. And there's some, I don't want to define it because I'm sort of in my cloud of unknowing phase right now,
Cool.
where I don't want to
Very
define
nice.
things. I just want to just surrender to these forces without trying to intellectualize them right now. And I actually have the cloud of unknowing on my bedside right now.
Nice.
So I'm kind of like in this whole like contemplative, mystic, Yogananda kind of mindset where just like, let it go, let it happen. Don't try to cling, don't try to grasp these things. But I think there's is tremendous power in that. Let these things happen because there is something behind synchronicity. There is an intelligence behind synchronicity. And it doesn't like when you do certain things, but it does like when you do other things.
Yes.
It's the weirdest experience, Of course, skeptics, what's the term they use? What's the term they use when you get results that they don't like? What's the term they use?
Who fucking cares?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Confirmation bias.
Oh, yes.
So
Right.
that's another term. People are going to say pareidolia, they're going to say just delusion, but confirmation bias is another big one. And that's like when you keep getting results that they don't like,
Yeah.
that they don't feel comfortable with, or they don't want you getting. And that's another thing with synchronicity. But I don't see it that way. I see it like there's a force that wants you to focus on certain things, wants you to move in certain areas, doesn't want you to become promiscuous with your practice. If you focus on a certain set of symbols, stay there until you exhaust them. And if you go back and look at the blog, I mean, this is something that I was doing a lot of stuff at the beginning on solar symbolism until you explained where that all comes from. And then I was really into like Egyptian mystery stuff because there was a lot. I was basically responding to what was being put out in the culture. But I would work those veins as deeply as I could, where a lot of people were just pulling from this and pulling from that. Yeah, you know what it is? Have you ever read it? Of course you have. If anybody out there has ever read any Kenneth Grant books, right?
Yes.
And he just pulls from everything just to get the result. And I took that as my negative example. It's like, don't be Kenneth Grant. Don't just pull from things just because you need a correspondence. I just need any correspondence. And again, that's what I think happens a lot of times with gematria. You just want the result. And what I'm trying to tell people in this book is just wait. If you don't get the result, put it aside, go back to it later, or it's just going to come to you out of the blue. Just, have faith, have patience. Don't force it. Let things happen. But of course, this is anathema in a lot of ways to current 21st century thinking, isn't it?
Yeah. It's also like the first time I can talk about this for magic, and then I want to come back to. I'm glad you're going in a mystic, less precise thing because I hit the Neoplatonists and went more precise, and I'm going to tell you one of the things that I think is going on there. So it's a good match. But the other thing, beginners, the people who end up doing something like this, whether it's magic, whether it's synchromysticism, have just had something happen to them that has popped them out of official reality. And it's like they either want to get back in or they want to, they know that this stuff is like real, the cosmos is alive, whatever you want to call it. And I understand the urgency of like, oh, I belong here. I must do this, right? But the harder you force it, the further it's going to run from you. And the trouble is until you've had it happen again. Until the results show up, you don't know that it's not like a, no, but I want it now. It's like, I get it. You're dealing with entities and a cosmos that has a better understanding of time than our puny human minds. From their perspective, it's all done already, right? You're here waiting for it like it's a pizza. It's not how it's going to happen. The Instagram artist, well, I'll ask you after we record to send me the link, and we'll put it in the show notes. But because that's a perfect example, especially as he limits his palette to a certain amount of colors. That is a trimmed down, or like a fractal metaphor of senses, right? Like, so you're dealing with a cosmos that is everything, and you want to necessarily limit down to a collection of techniques that allow it to speak to you in a way that is at least some form of sense making, right? So here's this human doing these things. Well, it's got eyes and ears and nose and whatever. And inside of that, it's using, like, you kind of have to show up with an understanding of what's going on. And this is the piece that reminded me of the Iamblichus and reminded me of the Amazon. So in a lot of Amazonian thought, there's what's called the metaphoric divide. So that when you're asleep, the things that happen in dreams are absolutely real. And when you wake up, because you've crossed the dimension back into the waking world, everything that happened in dream must be interpreted metaphorically. If you interpret it literally, you've fucked it up. You've broken the agreement, the collection of symbols, the framework of understanding for the mythic. So they have these techniques, like you find something like that around the world, which is like, we have protocols and collections of ideas and images that we use to have as reliable as possible contact with whatever you want to call it, the spirit world, the imaginal, or so on. And when you said, listen, stay in your lane, if you've got a symbol system, a symbol set that works for you, just stay there or you're going to fuck it up. Like, that's where I'm like, that's the Amazon. That's literally, that's an Amazonian suggestion, right? Which is, once you get a collection of protocols and images to work, stick with it until you exhaust. And the exhausting thing, I think, is important, because this would bring it back to Jung, which is whatever's going on in the unconscious, whatever aspect of your soul's individuation that requires this dance with these particular symbols, dance with it until it stops dancing. Either you've changed on a conscious level or an unconscious, and wait for the next thing.
Yeah, dance with the one that brung you. Basically. But again, this is counterintuitive to a lot of people, but also, I mean, I have to say, a lot of people who are interested in magic or the occult or whatever tend to be, I don't want to say fickle, but they tend to have short attention spans. I mean, you've seen this over the years, how we saw neo-pagans go from like American Indian to Celtic to whatever, to Dianic witchcraft, or I mean, whatever. Just like, it's kind of like going through the jukebox. Well, what song do I want to play next? You know, I mean, just kind of scrolling through all the different options. You know, and I guess that's fine, but I just don't think it gets you anywhere. It doesn't accomplish anything. And it's like, I think of like Zen masters, like when I was sort of in my new age phase, I was really interested in Zen. I was reading a lot of like Suzuki and books like that. I was really interested, but I was really interested in this whole idea of like, stop trying to put your finger on it. Stop trying to define it. Let it happen. But it's also like, do more with less. You know what I mean? And to me, all great masters in any art form do the most with the least. Because it isn't the tools, it's what's inside, what they, their minds, their subconscious, whatever, however you choose to define it. But I think there's an obvious emphasis, because we live in a consumer culture, for, I can just buy this. I just need, just that one more tool, that new deck. I got that new deck I've been putting my on my wish list on Amazon or something, just one more thing. I know I'm going to get there. I just have to buy something new. And it's just like, step away from that. Step away from that. Don't try to buy your way out of your dilemma. Let's just say, but this is my experience is that synchronicity doesn't like certain things. It doesn't like, I talked about saved searches. It it's almost like you're usurping the spontaneity that is such an important part of synchronicity. You're trying to outsmart it, I think. And all these certain ways that you try to outsmart this process, I don't want to say it's going to punish you. That seems a
No, but
little
this
severe,
is
but
such a beautiful way of saying it, right? Because we just finished up the Greek inheritance course, so we've been, there's nymphs and all the rest of it, and people, and whatever, people misinterpret or can, with modern eyes, misinterpret pursuing a nymph through the woods or being pursued, like because it ends in sex, right? Like, so it's like, oh, so you saw a ghost woman bathing and you're like, oh, I'm gonna hit that, and then she fled through the woods, and you like, sure, that's a modern read on it. But the other one is this, like, it's not gonna punish you, but it's gonna peek at you through the woods, and you're gonna chase, and it's gonna playfully avoid you, and maybe it'll end in sex or not, right? But like, there's archetypal resonances to what you're saying there, and it's like the don't buy things and the safe searches is you can kind of close your eyes and feel which parts, like the best tools. This is coming back to the library idea, like pen, paper, and if you want tarot cards, but like organic, analog, right? You step into the digital world because that's where the gods, going back to the Amblicus idea, have the fastest, well, a capacity to generate and show you images of themselves faster than, at least in recorded history, we've ever had. But it's still stolen technology. It's still not, I don't want to say pure, that's not the right word, but that doesn't have the imaginal archetypal depth that that real stuff does, right? So yeah, it's a sense thing. It's that don't buy the next device, the next whatever. And it, like, you can do this. I mean, I don't know if there's any newspapers left in the world, but like, you could do it with a library card and a pen and paper. Like, you could, right? You did.
you could also, walk into Hobart, but it's
Exactly.
easier to
Yeah,
take a
yeah,
car.
yeah, exactly.
Um, well, here's the thing. I mean, when you really do follow the rules, and these are rules that I guess I've invented or I've developed, but when you follow these protocols, let's just say, and things start to work, it's better than sex. It's better than
Mm.
drugs. There's no better rush in life, at least for me. Personally speaking, I when I really bust something open, and not only do I bust something open, but all these little seedlings. It's like when a dandelion or something bursts, and it just sends out all these seedlings, and you can there's all these new paths that you can follow. It's the best feeling in the world. I don't know if I've made that as clear as I should have. I mean, I did mention that in passing, but it's like, why should I do this? Why should I get involved with this? Why should I waste my time in all this? Like, quite frankly, because when it works, there's just nothing better.
I
And
think
it's
that
purely
end of the book is
subjective.
beautiful. I think that because the final part of the discussion is the why does it work? But for me, it feels very shamanic because in from a shamanic perspective, we have 1,500 diseases in the West. Shamanism has one, right? Like, it's not being in right relation. It's like the cosmic loneliness. It's that really the Gnostic sense of like, uh, with something like synchromysticism, you become aware on an embodied level. Oh, I'm not alone. Like, I belong in the cosmos, and this thing is like alive and playful, and like, that's
And
just
also benevolent too. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
one of the things that I point out is that synchronicity is almost like an ambulance chaser sometimes. But those are the ones you notice. You're not going to notice something that happens in just some mundane, trivial setting. You're going to notice, like, 9/11, right? You know what I mean? I mean, you're going to pay attention to those things. I'm not saying that synchronicity doesn't happen outside of these catastrophes and disasters and so on. That's not true at all. But those are the ones that you tend to focus on, particularly when you're just starting. Particularly when you're just starting with it. But I have a nice little synchronicity for you that sort of
Go for
involves
it.
AI, directly pertaining to this book. So, you mentioned Christopher Knowles Fraser, and of course,
Yeah.
there it is right there. Uh, so I was having these weird problems with Amazon, with Kindle Direct, with the manuscript and with the cover. And they just kept sending me these like strange corrections that didn't make any sense. I was like, I think I wanted out on the 2nd of June, I believe. Yeah. So I wanted out a certain time, and it just kept messing me up. No, change it, do it over again, do it over again. And finally, what I did is there was a problem with like the cover image and something. I just cropped it like a micron and resubmitted, and then like, oh, it's okay. Because the directions they were giving me, like the cover would have been like halfway off the front of the page. So, so when I finally get the message, from Kindle, oh, your book has been published. This right around the same time, the news breaks that Elizabeth um, made her debut for this tour with Massive Attack, right around the same time that my book went live. You know what I'm saying? Like, and nobody knew about it. Like, even her social media people were totally surprised. Nobody had any idea that this was going to happen. So that's a lane, of course, that I've stayed in for quite some time. Maybe to much people's chagrin, but
Look, it's
listen,
not done with you. Those are the rules. Like, if it's
you
not
know,
done with you, it's not done with you.
you go duck hunting where the ducks are. I've never seen, the thing that I do say is that, and people get so sick of me sometimes because I talk about in the book that I had this really profound, so I was doing all this sync work. And then I had this like really profound dream that I went into this church, right, with my bass player at the time, this guy I was working with, musician, and my wife. And we went into this church, and there was a black minister standing at the lectern, and he had like a Grail cup, and it was like glowing. It was like this golden glow, this like really powerful golden glow. And for some reason, I focused on this church, a couple towns over, and I went to that church one Sunday, and the service was, typical deadly dull American liberal Protestant nonsense. But it turns out that the minister, and it was a black dude, was the brother of the church of the minister who was the pastor of the church that I grew up in. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
this is 300 miles away,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden it's his brother. So it's like I kind of saw that as like a summoning, and that was 5 days before the X-Files premiered. And then I also found out later on that Elizabeth and Jeff Buckley started their relationship right around that same time. So like September 5th, 1993 was this incredibly significant period for me because all these things started to come together. It was pretty amazing, and it's interesting that the synchronicity stuck with me more than the boring liberal Protestant endurance test did. It's like I had very little patience for that, but that was like I don't want to say it was a prophetic dream necessarily, but maybe it was. Because also the sanctuary of the church was sort of semicircular in my dream. And when I went to that church, I'd never stepped foot in that church before in my life. And there's, in the dream, there's a black. Oh, and it was Communion Sunday. Methodists have communion first Sunday of every month. So there's the Grail, right?
Yeah.
So
Of course,
that
yeah.
was that was like that was the life-changing experience. That was true. That was classic Jungian textbook synchronicity, right? And
Well,
of
yeah,
course, it's
because like the vision of the Grail is what sends the knights off, right? They're all in Camelot. They get like, go and find this, the vision of the Grail, and off they go on their quests, and that's what you did.
it
You
was my
sad rising
assignment. It was
sun.
an assignment, right?
Yeah,
My Grail,
that's
my
the
Grail
beginning
quest
of it. They're
assignment.
all hanging out in Camelot. Vision of the Grail. All right, off you go. Find it. Scram. Yeah.
Well, that was really profound to me because, I've said my childhood was just utter chaos and misery. And like the only structure that I had in my life was the church. That was it. Everything else is just sheer madness. I mean, we've talked about this before, but so it had a really profound effect on me and changed the course of my life. And it's interesting that it also coincided or synchronized more accurately with these other two major life-changing occurrences that were a bit further down the road, namely, the premiere of the X-Files and Elizabeth and Jeff starting to date. But like I said, I mean, I wouldn't have been doing any of this if I hadn't been so impatient with David Flynn to update his damn website. Dude, come on. I waited 4 years for this. I had to do it myself. So anyway, I don't know. But I've learned so much in the past, in the past several years. But a lot of it's been like a lot of dead ends, a lot of bad leads. I mean, it hasn't always been a happy experience to pursue. And I really stopped with the synchromysticism for a few years when I was really having a lot of problems with the drugs and stuff. So it is a lot of work. But like I said, when it clicks, there's just nothing better in life. I really mean that.
Failure is part of it because you learn to same thing with magic. Like Pete Carroll, again, because apparently synchromysticism is a chaos magic discipline, would say that like if the majority, like you're basically not good at magic, there's two, like if the minority of your spells come off, you're good at magic, and the majority of your divinations are accurate, you're good at magic. But if you get them reversed, you shit, right? Like practical enchantment, doing magic, it's just baked into it. There's plenty of failure. We're just not good at that because this is on the other side of the metaphoric divide. Like it's just how the signal works. Like some of it's going to be wrong.
The signal,
some of
yes.
it isn't. Yeah.
We are receivers.
Exactly.
So I'm glad you brought that up because the signal is something I think about all the time. And that's a metaphor I think about all the time, the signal. And the fault is not in the transmitter, the fault is in the receivers.
Yep.
We are fallible, we are limited in scope, we have needs and wants that color our ability to receive that signal most accurately. But that's how I really think, that is the one metaphor that I've stuck with for quite some time. And like I said, I'm really in like a cloud of unknowing thing. And I find it like so liberating and just so almost, I hate to use this term, but exhilarating. It's like, no, I'm not going to try and name this and claim it, and that's the term I use. Like, I'm not going to try and name and claim it. I'm not going to try to control it. And the thing that I say that I've always said, and to me, this is a major part of mysticism, is that if you can control it, I don't think it can help you. Because if you can control it, you are more powerful than it.
Yep.
And this is why, I have such a problem with sorcery and demon summoning and stuff. And I went into great detail in the Endless American Midnight about this. Is like, if you're trying to contact these entities, what do you have to offer them? Like, why should they help you? Like, what do they care about you? And you're going to make deals with them, and you're going to maybe do things that are criminal in order to, like, what, why would they do it? Like, the term I use, like, why are you being so nice to me? And it's obviously something, but this is the flip side of synchromysticism as well, is that I use it to kind of try to code break all this ritualism that has become so ubiquitous. And it's interesting because back in 2016, when like Gothic Tunnel, and I was thinking, like, what is the purpose of all this ritualism? Well, now we know what the purpose of all the ritualism was. They were trying to appeal to their dark gods to gain favor for this insane World War III or apocalyptic process that they're pursuing. And that to me, like, I admit that I was like, when I was studying all these things, that I was able to draw on all the work that I'd done with synchromysticism to decode a lot of the symbolism. It's like, there's clearly a major sense of anxiety among the people who are performing these rituals. But why? Like, what's going on? Like, what are they anxious about? And now we know. Now we know, unfortunately. And
Well,
so,
the one of the things I like in the book, which is sort of about, if you can describe it, it can't help you, because you actually find that, I would say, in competent ceremonial magic, like the English angel magician Rudd, for instance. He um, in the book, you have like, which I love, just don't apologize, don't explain it, don't apologize, right? Because, and for a couple of reasons, like it'll fuck with your flow for a start, but secondly, you can't, like, and this is coming back to that. This is coming back to that metaphoric divide. Another Amazonian term for it, yosto yosto, is language twisting. It is permanently in a twisting spiral shape. If you nail it down into one word, you've just got a dead butterfly. You haven't got it right. So that tension about what you can and can't, because you control demons by naming them, right? Like that's in the Bible. Like I name it and I have power over it. Like, well, it's more specifically now it's in a place where it is unhelpful. Like it can't do anything. That tension of what language can and can't do, I think, comes back to that single symbol set idea of like, where it is our interface. This is the signal receiver thing. The receiver works at that level, at a word single symbol set level. And the things that it gets through isn't the stuff that's flying through the air at that point. And it's really important, like tension. It's like a reality bubble, but like in a good sense. Like this is our interface with the cosmos. And I think that tension is in good versions of, when I say good versions of it, like competent versions of ceremonial magic, because it looks like that where you around the world where you have similar interactions where there's things that you call in order, and it's coming back to that structural logic, right? Like the people who didn't get this beaten and burned out of them like we did have something that it looks kind of like this, because I think it would. I think if it's real, it's going to look approximately not the same, but like, oh no, I get what you're doing there when you look around the world. Does that make sense?
it does. But I would bring in the whole idea, as opposed to maybe the ceremonial magic idea, and why mysticism to me is different, because to me it's ultimately about surrender. And that's something that people don't want to accept.
Yeah.
People don't want to accept the power of surrender. That you surrender yourself. And this is where faith comes in. I always had a problem with faith. I never really understood it because I always sort of went by the whole vernacular, mundane sense of like, oh, you just believe in things you can't see, right? Or you, to me, like that's not faith. Like it's like, I'll have faith in you that, I can trust you with certain things and that you'll come through and, you'll deliver. That to me is faith, and its faith to me is based on experience, and experience is another important part of mysticism. That it's the experience that's the payoff. I say this all the time, particularly on the Fraser blog. It's like I want to change your experience of the world. I want to change the way you experience reality, and that to me, it's like, what is the point of this? Well, it's raising your experience. It's tuning you in to a higher, more complex and purer signal than what you used to. It's kind of like to me, it's like, using synchromysticism to go from like AM radio to FM radio. And this is like, I'm dating myself like crazy here, right? Because there are a lot of people like, what are you talking about? AM radio? I don't know what that is. So it's just going from, I trust people. You know what AM radio is, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying. You get my metaphor here, right?
Yeah, it's 4K TV. You're going from like, yeah, it's
Well,
improving.
let's do it like it's going from using like a telephone modem to using broadband.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a better, more up to date metaphor. I just
FM brings in like better receivers, bigger well, not bigger, but like wavelengths that can carry more information. So the people who listen podcasts are just millennial. They're all like 35 and up. They all know what AM radio is. Let's not pretend. Yeah.
Well, in case not, just think of the whole, dial-up versus broadband. But that to me is part of the point of it, because when you enrich your experience of life, you find you need the crutches that a lot of people depend on less and less and less. Okay. Now, but here's another example that people get sick of me saying, but like growing up on the ocean, growing up in the water, and like the things that we used to do in the water, like I wasn't like scuba diving and stuff like you are. I mean, we were like, we used to ride the rapids, or we used to body surf. I mean, all these kind of things where you're surrendering yourself to the ocean. You're surrendering yourself to the ocean's power. You can't just like let it take you off into the horizon. I mean, you have to learn to work with it and to basically steer yourself. But you understand that there are powers far beyond you, but they will work with you if you work with them.
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Oh,
And
definitely.
that's the metaphor that I kind of draw. I mean, there are all these metaphors that are very simple. And again, people who listen to a lot of my podcasts, whatever, get sick of hearing of them, but they're very effective because they make something that most people are going to see as just incredibly esoteric and just almost, like I said, almost delusional, put them in a much more easily understood framework. And that's, again, that's what I try to do with the book. And I'm glad you picked up on a lot of these things, because it might seem to some people to just, let me just say this. I just think it's really important that if you're going to work with synchronicity, that you safeguard yourself. I mean, I'm not talking about like banishing rituals or anything like that, but I'm just talking about like staying sane and not getting carried away with all the triviality with what I call the guppies. Because when synchronicity first hits you like a wave, there are going to be a lot of little after effects that you're going to be tempted to chase, and you can't. You have to stay focused on the main course of action, because again, I mean, I've just seen it. I see people go crazy. It sounds weird to people. It sounds like almost incomprehensible. I mean, maybe a lot of these people are already on the edge. I don't know. But I want people to work with synchronicity without losing their minds. So there you go.
Well, I think you have delivered the book, if there's ever going to be one that can do that for people. And I was really impressed with the rigors and the safeguards, and like, this is how you do it. Because almost like in the how to do it section, there's almost more of how not to do it, because actually that's the right ratio. Like there's more about how not doing it. When I had Eileen McCusick on, who developed biofield tuning, she was talking about her book, because there's a whole bunch of physics in it, and she would get complaints that's like, well, the first 2/3 of the book is physics, and then the techniques are in the back isn't that long. And she's like, there's kind of like, on the one hand, there's not much to it, and on the other hand, it's very easy to get wrong. Like it's that same ratio. These simple, powerful, mystic things are like, there's not a lot to biofield tuning, but you can definitely get it wrong. It's the ratio of what to do versus what not to do is like 3-7, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. And conversely, one of the things that I think is important about synchromysticism in this day and age, is that it's easy for mystics to, again, sort of lapse into that solipsistic navel gazing.
Yeah.
And which is the whole very unfair, by the way, the very unfair stereotype. But when you go back, you were talking about the Neoplatonists, or the Zen masters, certain forms of Buddhism, Christian mystics, particularly in the Eastern tradition. I mean, these people were all after the same thing, that same direct connection to the source. And they all understood that it don't come easy.
Yeah.
Right? It don't come easy. You got to work for it. And it almost like it makes you work for it. You know what I'm saying? when you look at Buddhist monasteries, and it seems like all they do all day is what, chop wood and carry water, right? I mean, that whole uh, little maxim there. But that is part of the process as well. And I think me being older and having raised a family and had a career and all these kind of things where you can't mess around, I mean, there's very little margin for error in raising a family, you know what I'm saying, or paying a mortgage or having a career with Marvel for 25 years. You can't mess around. You have to deliver. And I think, what you're picking up as far as the rigor and stuff, it's I've had the benefit of that experience that I
Hmm.
want to bring. And I want everyone to become, I don't want everyone to become a synchromystic, but I want everybody who's interested and who's doing synchromysticism to do it well.
And
Because
you
I
all
think,
like, I think you should, I was thinking about this before we recorded. I think you should know about it. So everyone by now knows Pete Carroll's version of how to do sigil magic, or like the it's the same one, like the Grant Morrison approach. Let's say that. Very few people use it, but like you kind of, if you're in whatever this world is, you kind of need to know how to use it. Like, and I see, some people are all about it and changing their lives with it. For me, I think synchromysticism is now old enough and useful enough as a contained standalone system. And you kind of mentioned that in the book. It's like, I want it to be, I mean, give it a few centuries, we won't be around. But like, I want it to be like tarot or I Ching or something, where it's like, here is a contained set of protocols to encounter the cosmos. And I think you've done that. Like, I really do think, like, now I think anyone who's in
legitimate
this
form of
world,
woo. A legitimate
yeah,
form of woo is the
yeah.
term that I use. Yes.
And for me, it's like that. It's, I mean, again, a few centuries later, it might be tarot. But for now, when I think about contemporary practices that I think anyone in our world, which is to say, weird world, whatever you want to call this, has to know. They don't necessarily have to use, but like, oh no, you need to know the right and wrong way to do sigil magic or to do synchromysticism or whatever. I think you've achieved something rare in that sense, because you've now got like a standalone collection of techniques that belongs legitimately in the techniques of the professional weirdo.
Well, I will say this one thing though. I spell out all these criteria to how to evaluate synchronicity and all, how to evaluate its significance. When I first started doing this work, I mean, I developed similar techniques, similar protocols, similar criteria, but they were a lot more involved. And maybe that was just because I was just starting out, and that's just, you're always
Yeah.
given to complexity when you're starting out on a project like that. But I really try to boil it down so people, it's very highly subjective. I mean, what's significant or even coincidental to some people might not be significant or coincidental to other people. So that's why I say it's more of an art form, but it's like trying to develop a set of, I hate to say it, but scientific standards to practice an art form, because any art form worth practicing has a set of scientific standards.
Mm-hmm.
Music, art, poetry, architecture. You got to know the rules. I mean, you can break them, but you got to know them first before
Yeah.
you can break them effectively. And maybe the same is true with synchronicity. I mean, I'll leave that up to other people to decide.
I think music's the best, because obviously it came from, if people don't know, synchronicity as a concept isn't just Jung's. It was Jung dealing with a very famous physicist at the time, fleshing it out. So music is physics. Like music is correctly being in resonance with the harmonic nature of reality, and so is synchronicity. So is mysticism. Like it's more queer in the original sense of the term. It's more eerie. Uh, but I think it runs on the same science. I think I don't know. What do you think?
Well, music is math in motion.
Sure.
I think but it is all about very deep, and I hesitate to use the word eternal precepts, concepts, realities, the harmonic resonances and things like this are part
Exactly.
of nature, right? And the first instruments that were made, as far as we can tell, were meant to replicate sounds made in nature, birds, reeds, all these sorts of things, hoofbeats, the hoofbeats and the drums and the bird call and with the flute and so on. Music is always been incredibly central to my life and is becoming more and more central. My mysticism practice, as it were, is more and more oriented towards music. And I don't necessarily want to say that music is going to produce more powerful syncs. I think it depends on the practitioner.
Exactly. Depends on the receiver.
But I think that music is very, very underrated in mystical practice, even though every single mystical tradition throughout history has had it at the center, but we're sort of almost in this period of reaction against that, but I don't think you can have. I don't even think you have magic without music. I think music
I like what you were saying there about the first instruments being, blowing across the top of a reed or banging rocks together or like eventually a drum, like hitting a log or what have you. And it is to respond to the sound. It's call and response with the cosmos, which is synchromysticism. So the first, if you think about, because I actually, speaking of spirits, I asked a spirit once to show me what the first act of magic was. And it showed me, and this is obviously metaphoric, unless it isn't, but it showed me a woman on what appeared to be the African savannah, and she was watching the wind move through the tree, and she moved her arms. Oh, if you're listening to this rather than watching it, like she basically lifted her arms and mapped the movement of the wind through the trees with her arms. So she was in resonance, and this spirit said that was the first act of magic. That's what that was.
That's beautiful. I love that.
And the call and response, like if you follow the logic of the first human, I don't think history works this way. I think we're in the mythic when we say this, but like the first human who blew across the top of a reed or hit a log and found the sound to be pleasing and resonant with the cosmos. Because when you're in ayahuasca in the middle of the jungle, in the middle of the night, the sounds of the jungle, the singing and the icaros of the humans doing the singing, it's the same. It's the universe just calling and responding. It's wonderful. And that's why I like, for me, synchromysticism is closest to music, because it's the harmonies of the universe flowing through us and us being part of it. I think that's amazing.
Hope so. I would hope so. I'm not sure that it's fully reached that fulfilled potential yet,
okay,
but
so
I would hope so.
It can in the right hands. If I were to pick up a guitar, you would not get Hendrix. Okay, so
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to backtrack because I had a thought come into my head, and it's so hot up here that my oxygen levels are a bit low right now because it's
for
a bit
people
stuffy.
like, obviously, because we're doing this we'll do official birthday specials from now on, but it's midwinter in Tasmania. My feet are numb because I had to turn the heater off, and Chris had to turn the fan off. This is what we do for you people.
Yes, I'm on the right side of the globe and he's on the wrong side. No, but did I send you that? Do you know who One O Trick's Point Never is?
Yes, I do, but I don't think you sent me. Yeah.
Okay, so he did something with Elizabeth, and it was called Tales from the Trash Stratum. And it's basically him making weird sounds on the synth and her like making weird bird noises.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like absurd, and it's completely abstract, and there's no beat. It's just completely free form sound. It's just basically an exercise in sound rather than music. But I was listening to it last night and I started to cry because it captured. I'm really like, my wife is really into birds. I mean, we have hundreds of birds coming through our yard. We're constantly throwing out seeds. We have bird feeders. We have a hummingbird feeder, but it's like one of the things that really helped me recover, when I was trying to get past the drug dependency and so on and the depression was, reconnecting with nature. And I think the first thing that I really reconnected with was the birds.
Hmm.
the world of birds. And Alan Watts said something really interesting that always stuck with me. He said, people think like, why do birds sing? And like scientists have all these explanations, communication and all this kind of stuff. And Watts said, what if birds sing just for the sheer pleasure of it?
They do.
Because they
It's because it's
enjoy the
awesome.
sound.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And it's summer here, it's winter there. And to me, it's like I'll sit out on the front porch and listen to the katydids and the crickets and the birds and the owls and the frogs. And it's like a symphony. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we were talking about this on the Facebook group today. Like somebody had said, like, I'm not a Gnostic because, I think Sophia's creation is pretty damn beautiful. You know what I'm saying? And I sort of agree with that. I said, yeah, like, I was pretty Gnostic when I was on drugs, but now I'm sort of post-Gnostic or PONO, is what I call it. but I also start to wonder, it's like, because language, and if you're doing all the Greek stuff, you're perfectly able to speak to this. But the whole idea of the cosmos isn't always like the world, but it's like the world of nature, the natural world, but also the world of forms,
Yep.
the world of structures, the world of laws, the world of trade, the world of control. And part of like my post-Gnostic revelation is that what if the pleroma, or the pleroma, however you choose to pronounce it, is the natural world, like the fullness is the natural world, is creation, right? And then the archonic deception reality, or the abortion, or however you choose to define it, is the world of form, is the world of structure, is the world of language, is the world of like I said, law and war and control.
Yep.
Like that is the fallen world, not the natural world.
I think so. Yeah.
That's how I choose to redefine it.
No, yeah, absolutely. That's how I incorporate archons into like I guess a cosmos' jungle. And there's a thing of all people Jordan Peterson said uh, in regards to we're not war the Paul quote, like not warring with flesh and blood, but against like powers and principalities. The way Peterson talks about that is like that's a collection of ideas, because he obviously is like blah 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 woke Marxism. So for him, and it's not wrong that is a power or a principality, and you go into like so because he's like you could mow down all your political enemies, but you can't actually kill that principality. You can't kill that power. And he's like that's the thing that he thinks Paul was talking about, and it's very Peterson framed, because the evil principality he's talking about is this. But from a Gnostic or Pono perspective, it works for anything. It works for any collection of ideas. I literally think the state as an idea is that. I think the state is the fucking demiurge, like in all its forms, and you can't kill it, like, and you can't get it out of people sufficiently. Like the inability to make people sufficiently anarchist after the last 4 years and rolling into World War III, where the last of the boomers are trying to kill all the zoomers. It's like, when are you going to be done with this principality? When are you going to do it? Never,
Well, I would
unfortunately.
argue, see, but I would argue that there's an intelligence behind
Oh, totally. That's
it.
exactly, yeah.
See, I forget who he was talking to, but Miguel recently was discussing like how Paul was essentially Gnostic in his worldview,
For sure.
because he saw, when he talks about the powers, principalities, thrones, and dominions, that's basically the archons.
Yep.
But it's in the sense of the time that he was writing, which is really sort of pre-Gnostic, to be frank. You had sort of proto-Gnostic thinking, but Gnosticism wouldn't really start to flower until the end of the first century, into the second century.
I think Paul wrote later than that, but anyway,
Well,
I think that Paul
whatever,
wrote, yeah.
whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
it's the Watchers, and we've talked about the Watcher cult, like that there is these angelic powers where Paul said, don't worship the angels, because the angels that we can interact with are the fallen ones, they're the ones who left their first estate and so on. Um, and I think that makes a lot more sense, even though I wouldn't go full bore with Paul was Gnostic, like in the sense of,
He,
Valentinian Gnosticism
yeah, he
or
was
what have you.
Gnostish. Like everyone,
Yeah,
like
Gnostic adjacent.
yeah, everyone back then was kind of Gnostish. Like that's what it was. Like because the ideas
But what
hadn't
I'm
been
saying is that
demarcated out
Enoch,
into categories. Yeah.
well, what I'm trying to say though is that Enoch was incredibly influential, very, very popular. I mean, it's referred to dozens of times in the New Testament, though not openly, but lines that are unique to Enoch are quoted in the New Testament. But that was the whole, but that's the whole idea what I'm talking about, where the world of forms and the world of control is the archonic structure. Because what is the context for this? These are religious Jews writing in the what is second or first century BC, however you want to choose to define the timeline. But it's just like one conquer after another. They got rid of the Greeks, but now that's the Romans. And before the Greeks, it was the Assyrians. And before the Assyrians, it was the Babylonians. And you know what I'm saying? And before the Babylonians, it was the Egyptians. It's like this musical chairs of control. And that to me is why I start to work in this framework of a post-Gnostic ideation, let's just say, that the world of forms is the archonic world, the world of laws, the world of commerce, all these sorts of things that are not, are necessary, obviously, but also limit us, limit our potential,
Yeah. Yeah.
limit our experience.
So, well, because I would put them as denizens in the world of forms, like specifically, right? Because if you think about commerce, that makes, and this is in fact, funnily enough, you really should grab Hellenic Tantra because he has some really fascinating footnotes of the Neoplatonists at the time observing the rise of Christianity and pointing out like where they went fucking wrong and like dangerously wrong. And it actually comes back to the whole summoning a demon thing. Like they're literalizing the experience of the imaginal into the physical, and that's not going to end well. And it didn't really interesting stuff, right? Because I think commerce is also Mercury, and so like the world of forms is like Plato's description of the spirit world is how I frame it, right? And I think getting it too precise and not leaving it loosey goosey, like I kind of push at the back end of Plato and or at least the Neoplatonics and say it's not perfect and it's not this ordered machinery. I think that's a human erroneous perception. I think it is more spirity right at the back end of it. But that is where I think you have entities who are for the necessary functioning of the physical cosmos holding restrictive and constrictive frequencies so that everything kind of stays together. And I also think that that's where you get ones that like who knows why this being this archon that is like the notion of a state, like who knows what it's doing in service of the cosmos. In 40 million years time we might find out why that we have this like restrictive beam that's holding physical reality together in this configuration that leads to wars and mass injections and so on. There's probably some kind of thing 40 million years away as to why. But I think they're structural components of it rather than a one-to-one. But yeah, totally. I think if you like unfocus your eyes, again, they're all kind of talking about the same stuff, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, but there are two things that I want to bring up because you keep bringing up this Hellenic Tantrism book.
Yeah.
And this is another synchronicity because not only was I doing a lot of reading into the Neoplatonists while I was working on this book, but I was also fascinated by this whole idea of Greek Buddhists
Mm-hmm.
and how Buddhist missionaries were known in Alexandria and so on. So
Yeah.
that's just, again, that's a
It's
little interesting synchronicity that we're sort of
oh,
on
you
that,
should, like
same track.
you'll vibe, trust me. And
And
the name
this
actually,
was a few months ago. I mean, if you just did the show recently, I mean,
it's a
I'm
couple of
talking a
weeks.
few
Yeah.
months ago.
Yeah.
But no, but as far as like the archonic structures and the power systems and the grids of control, I think one of the main tactics that is used to maintain their position is sort of like divide and conquer writ large.
Yeah.
So it isn't just dividing people from each other, but it's dividing people from their environment, you know, from nature, but also from themselves,
Yeah.
right? Dividing people, like the splits just never stop. I mean, you know, it's kind of like those old videos you'd see where somebody would just start cutting like a carrot or something and just start cutting into ever smaller slivers. And, you know, so it's almost like you can see through, like the sliver is almost translucent. And that to me is how the system tends to work. And what synchromysticism does, in my view, and at least the way I practice it, is that it starts to take all the things that have been broken apart and starts to put them back together.
Cute.
Okay.
Love it.
Is that cute, or is
Yeah.
I thought it was profound, not just cute, but no, you know,
I thought
it's
you were going to say it like end runs the shredder, because it's like a so division in that respect, this is a good example, right? Because it's a power in the universe that if we didn't have it, we would not be able to cut cake. You know, like from that perspective, if like the idea as a power or principality of dividing didn't exist in the universe, that wouldn't be there. When it's applied where it shouldn't, or again, I'm not sure if it's where it shouldn't or shouldn't be, right? Like we don't know. It just doesn't feel great that right now in these bodies. But I thought you were going to say like it's an end run of the shredder of like division, because it heals that. It's the same shamanic healing, right? Like of a re-encounter with something much bigger that you belong to and it belongs to you. It's that kind of being at home in the cosmos sense, I think.
well, I mean, maybe it is. I mean, maybe I just didn't word it in the same way that you would be thinking, but I mean, it's the same concept, just taking what is broken and putting it back together.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you another interesting. There was all these interesting things that I was reading up on or watching videos on when I was working on this book. But another idea is the whole idea in Hinduism of like we are in God's dream.
Yeah.
You know, we are just part of this dream. We're part of this drama. We're playing these certain roles. But I've sort of like almost synthesized that with the old Bill Hicks. It's just a ride,
Yeah. Very
right?
good.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So it's like a lot of interesting kind of not necessarily Jungian either, I guess you would say, but you know, all these interesting metaphors that I was drawing on, and one of them was just like, you know, we are playing not even a ride, but a game. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, that's sort of my contribution. So there's the Hindu idea that, you know, what is the dream of Atman, right? And then Bill Hicks with it's just a ride. And to me, it's like, well, what if it's a game? And we need to learn how to play the game properly. And objectively, I mean, there is a heavy gamesmanship to synchromysticism. There is, I don't want to say necessarily game theory behind it, but there is, you know, at its lowest form, I guess you would say it's kind of like a parlor game, or it can be like a parlor game. But I think that's valid in and of itself. I mean, you know, there are plenty of games that train your mind to work in certain ways that are going to benefit you in other pursuits, right?
Yeah.
So if people want to just pursue synchromysticism as a game, I mean, who knows? Maybe it's going to become a board game or a card game. Like, you know, it's going to be like the next Trivial Pursuit or something, or the next Magic the Gathering. I don't know. You know, who knows? But that's fine too. It's really put things back together, reconnect with the wholeness, with the holism, the holisticness, you know, the holiness, the holistic holiness. Reconnect with completion, you know. Don't let the world cut you up and spin you off and cut you away. You know, here's just another anecdote, and this might seem like a bit of a sidebar to some people, but more recently I was delving into the world of evangelical YouTube, and I was just like, oh my God, all it is like they're sinners, they're heretics. Oh, the charismatics, they're satanic. Oh, I mean not the fundamentalists, the Pentecostals, you know, that's just heresy and devil work. Like everybody is a heretic, everyone. it's so archonic that everything is divided. And I'm thinking like, yeah, okay, maybe back in the 80s you could get away with this stuff when you had some sort of influence over the levers of power, but now that you have none, don't you think you should start to maybe like put aside this need to declare everyone to be heretical or satanic or fallen away or a backslider or however you choose to define it? Don't you think you should just put that aside and sort of coalesce, so your kids aren't hauled off to, UN rape camps or something? I
Yeah.
mean, whatever is going to happen. I mean, or sent over en masse to get shredded up in Ukraine or Gaza or something. I mean, can't you just for 1 minute put aside your need to be like the unique one and only way so you can form coalitions to protect yourselves against a system that wants to destroy you? You know what I mean? It's just it boggles the mind. But it's just like that to me is also part of the archonic divide and rule game. Just keep splitting everything up. Sectarianism, it's
Exactly.
huge, huge tactic for the ruling powers. So, but you know how I feel. I mean, I definitely feel that there is an objective spiritual entity reality that is coming to our world increasingly and is influencing us.
Yep.
I think that's what MK Ultra was about. I think that's what this new iteration of MK Ultra is about. I mean, I know people get very angry at me when I bring this up, and they just think I've totally lost it. But it's like I've been following this evidence for a long time since I was really studying the whole thing with the Council of Nine, and it's like, how can I just disregard this chain of evidence that I've worked 20 years to put together? So. I mean, maybe a lot of your listeners or viewers will have a problem with that as well. And I start to get on the bad side of all the DMT bros, when I say that DMT is a huge part of this with this new MK Ultra 3.0, as I call it. But I mean, I'm not. I keep having to reiterate that I'm not anti-hallucinogen or whatever. It's the same thing with the syncs. It's like I think that people need to apply the same concepts that I apply to something like synchronicity, which isn't changing my brain chemistry or leaving me open to spiritual possession, to, basically playing with rocket fuel. You know what I mean? It's just I just feel that way. I mean, I know I
I
make a
wonder if
lot
the
of people
conditions
mad
are
when I say
different.
that.
So I think about the entities that, because being trapped here for 2 years during these state imprisonments,
Mm,
doing a lot of work way, way out with beings that would respond to the name of angel, but like we're older and we're kind of like, almost like, what are you bothering me with? And like, why are we doing it? They got a couple of answers. Like, if you don't go through this period again, you idiots will continue to think some of these are good ideas, right? And they were showing
mm,
me stuff like states and almost like AOCism, like rescuism, and all these ideas, right?
mm.
That you idiots, if you don't go through this process, because they don't care how many people die, like on those timelines, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm in a body for this stuff. This is unpleasant. But I also wonder, as this civilization, whatever the West is, ends, I keep getting the impression that it's like a these beings that we experience as evil, um, they're like the end of a decay process in a forest, where, like, for the fallen tree, the fungal
Mm.
hyphae are evil because it's eating the body, but it's not. Like, that's just what happens at this point of a tree's life. And we all, like, we have to do these caveats because God, it's so exhausting being in this 2024. Like, that doesn't mean that doesn't mean your heart doesn't bleed for Rafa or whatever, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we experience as evil beings that this is their job in the universe. Like, this is how they come to compost civilizations, if you will.
I'm glad you brought that up because the way I've sort of broken it down to its basic components is like it's the life impulse and the death impulse, the thanatos
Yes.
impulse.
Yeah.
So these entities that we speak of, um, might not even have their own agency in this, might be being used by a higher power
I think they
to,
are. I think, yeah.
this whole cycle of what is it in alchemy? It's, what is it? Rubio, Calcio.
I forget.
I
It's
forget too. But it is
speaking of
like
symbol
this.
sets I don't resonate with anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And I tried, believe me, I just couldn't wrap my head
I
around it.
fuck like Jung, if he just stuck to tarot, like I love Jung, he's my boy, but he's hard on for alchemy. Ugh. Anyway,
But I think, you know what I think it was, is that because it was so impenetrable, it's like this persistent and perpetual challenge, like this egg you could never crack. I think that had a lot to do with, to be
no
honest with you.
problem.
I mean, I think a lot of the things that he imposed on it were just basically his notions, his ideas that he sort of projected, ironically, since he was all about the whole thing with projection. But yeah, I mean, I really do think that's what it really boils down to, is that, like, are you moving towards a life impulse, or are you moving towards a death impulse?
Absolutely.
And the
Absolutely.
death
That's yeah.
impulse has become so overpowering in this culture. But I think these entities of which I speak have their own notions, have their own agendas. And it might just be like they just think that we're just like ants. It's like a kid pulling, the legs off of an ant, that kind of deal, where it's just like we don't even qualify.
Yeah.
We don't.
I think death cult worshippers don't summon these hostile entities. I think they are, again, coming back to like a a biology example. I think they're what happens when a death entity gets close. Like I think when you I don't think these beings were summoned. I
Heralds.
Yes, I
Heralds.
yeah, I
Yes.
don't think they're I the because again, and this is synchromysticism adjacent. It's just flat out Jungianism. When people, like, Western civilization is now a death cult. Like, you can have cultists if you want, but like the whole thing is worshiping and celebrating, and we're like we've saluted Nazis in Western parliaments, and we're now actively helping in genocides across the world in a frantic effort to stop World War III. That's a death cult. I don't know what else to tell you, and it's not like a yeah
Literally.
yeah
Literally. So it's a
yeah
doomsday cult, really.
yes,
You always hear
absolutely
about doomsday cults like Jim Jones or Heaven's Gate or something. This is the real doomsday cult.
yeah.
This is the cult that has the power to impose doomsday upon all of us, rather than like 40 or 50 followers or something. You know what I
And I
mean?
think these entities that and maybe some of them are, but I think these entities that it appears that people are actively worshiping, I think that happens as they get closer. I don't think there was some like I think it is like it's almost like the biological response in humans as these beings get closer to recognize their presence, and for some psychopaths to be in awe of them. Right? I think that's it's yeah, it's fascinating and not
Well,
great. Yeah.
I do believe that we've been here before, let me just say.
Oh, totally.
And I, I believe everything is cyclical, that all, nature is cyclical. I think all of our experience, all of creation is cyclical. I think that's just the basic nature of it. And like I said, we've seen apocalypses before. We've seen empires collapse. We've seen entire civilizations disappear almost overnight. Okay. So this whole idea that, that comes really from dispensationalism, that there's this straight line from Genesis to Revelation. I don't believe in that at all. I think it's childish, to be honest with you, because this process is part of the cycle. It's, you know,
Yep.
I don't want to necessarily say natural cycle, since that has a lot of connotations that sort of lessen it. Maybe the cosmic cycle, maybe the cosmic cycle, maybe that kind of language is more useful. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because it's like one of the things that I've really thought about a lot is that we need we need a new set of vocabulary that can explain and communicate all these ideas to people who don't have a religious background, who've never read, never darkened the door of a church or mosque or synagogue or whatever, have absolutely no concept of it, which is probably the majority of people under 40 these days, at least as far as the polling numbers that I've seen, where only 9% of the American population attends religious services every week. 9%. I mean, that's amazing. So we need a new set of terminology, vocabulary, metaphors, allegories, all these kind of things to talk about these processes, because all the old ones have just been, I don't want to say corrupted, that seems a little too extreme, but they've been diminished. I think let's stick with the term diminished. That a lot of this language that comes to us, whether it's from the Bible, whether it's from even from Buddhism, whether it's even from shamanism, whether it's from ayahuasca, whatever you choose to define it as, these, I'm not saying the basic precepts are wrong, but I'm saying they've all been wedded to vocabulary that trigger certain associations that aren't helpful, okay? That don't point us in the direction we need to go, because when you use the term God, right? God is a trigger, okay? It has all these associations that people are going to assign based on their experience, based on their culture, based on whatever. And I don't think that's helpful. But it's also not helpful when you start using all these kind of like quasi New Age metaphorical
So
terms.
I don't like, I actually don't like the sound. I write about, there's videos about this in the foundations course. I don't like the sound of the word God. I've never liked the sound of the word God. But the only thing that kind of irritates me more is if someone says source. Ugh. Like, and if you're out there and you listen to it, I'm like, oh, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I use source. It's like fine. I don't like the sound of the word God in my mouth. I don't like it. But anytime you try to replace it in a new age direction, it makes my skin crawl. And if that's your jam, people listening to this, go for it. I'm not saying stop using the word source. I'm saying I'm certainly not. I don't. So it's to that point, and it's like this is almost coming back around to staying in the lane and picking a symbol set, because how I would describe what you just said is that a lot of our there's not much tread left on the tires of what we've like got to work with here. Like there's still some. Don't drive in the wet. Do you know what I mean? Like we need new tires for this process. And interestingly, coming back to, well, if a symbol set comes to you from a synchromistic perspective, work with it until it leaves, or you get what you're supposed to out of it. This is part of the process of, like, I don't even want to say the development of the universe, but like the ongoingness of the cosmic dance is that some things work sometimes and not others. And as we're at a, like, whatever fourth turning, whatever you want for it, we're at a point where by definition the old stuff doesn't work anymore, because if it did, it wouldn't be ending. Like it's actually pretty simple, like
No, I
yeah.
totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. And that's I think when I talked about all these evangelicals who just constantly attacking other evangelicals. I mean, people have this whole idea that evangelicals are constantly attacking pagans. Oh dear, my camera. Oh, there we go. And they are, but they're also constantly attacking each other. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think in part of that is because they're trying to continue with systems that were developed in another world. They're trying to continue with symbol systems, with symbols, with systems of vocabulary, with even systems of ritual, of prayer that belong to somebody else.
Yeah.
They don't belong to us anymore. They're not ours anymore. We need to develop a new way to think about these things. But, when you talked about like source and everything, all I could think of is like, David Icke, right? He'll just tear into the reptilians and the power structure and everything like that and be right more often than wrong, right? But then he'll just talk about, we're fourth dimensional energy beings and, we're just like all this like cornball 60s Glastonbury cliche after cliche. And I just think like, you know what, David? You just lost everybody who you won,
But see,
before.
funny enough,
Because
that's almost
you can't stick the lane. This is the thing I always say about David. Icke is that he can't stick the landing because he always lapses into this like neo-theosophical gobbledygook rather than a guy that smart should be able to understand the audience and tailor that same message in a way that not only is the audience going to understand it. I mean, who understands that we're fourth dimensional beings
I know,
traveling
I
through
know, I
time and
know.
space? That is just completely nobody experiences that, you know? But
So he, like, I had for a while there friends in common with him. I've never met him or anything, and it used to irritate me that he would essentially, if you do any kind of magic, you're some sort, you're in like a Peter cult with Hillary Clinton, and I'm like, well, I'm not. I didn't get the fucking invite. All right. Um, and And I said, "See, so he knows he's doing magic, right? Because he sits there at his computer and he just channels stuff, and that's where these giant books with lurid pictures of lions come from." And friends in common are like, yeah, he knows he's doing magic. It's just that he also knows his audience is all refugees from the kind of Christianity that you're talking about. And so he can't say that. And to your point, it's like all well and good. Then why does he go down this like narrow frequency of light, fourth dimensional stuff when he could just go with, which I think everyone prefers anyway, a more loosey goosey, less described, like, listen, there is a God, whatever you want to call it. Obviously, a lot of the stuff humans do down here is bullshit, and we're doing it either wittingly or unwittingly at the behest of entities who have their own agendas. Like, you haven't lost anyone then with the fourth dimensional blah blah blah. But you know, it's like, yes, I don't know. Like, if you tried to, he's one of those people. Anyone, I guess, any creative. If you tried to change him in any way, it wouldn't be the thing that it is, right? Like a David, a 6.5 hour Wembley show that ends on like a cool, rational, not rational, but like a cool, coherent, like universal philosophy would be a bit of a letdown, perhaps.
I don't know. Well, listen, he's been doing it for a very long time, and he seems to be able to continue doing it. So maybe he's struck on the
There's
right.
doing something right. I went, funnily enough, speaking of David Icke, last month I was in Silustani in Peru, where he, whatever you want to say, went insane, had his experience in that stone circle. It's a very interesting spot. I'm to some extent not surprised. But speaking of kind of knowing his
Grant
audience,
Morrison in some sort of way, isn't it? Right? It's
yeah,
like,
well, it is like he's a
is
British
it?
mystic. He went on holiday to Peru and had a weird experience and came back and wrote some books.
Mm, mm. Well, buy my book, folks.
That's right. We should do that. We've done a good 2 hours. That's what you get, people. Go and get the book. And what else have you got going on? Catch us up. What's going on at old Secret Sun
Well,
HQ?
I'm taking the summer off to do. I've been just doing a lot of production. I've been putting a lot of stuff out, doing a lot of live streams, videos, a lot of blogging. I kind of my tank's a little low right now. I kind of need to refill the tank, and that's kind of my plan for the summer. Because I did like the Spandex Files I put out in September, and I just put out this book now. So that's two books within a year.
Yeah, you need a
And
break.
yeah, I kind of need a break. And that's two books within a year plus everything else. I would like to find the time to do my sequel to He Will Live Up in the Sky, but I have it all. I have the pile of index cards with all the plot points in it, but haven't been able to get a chance to do that. I'm just gonna be doing. We're doing stuff on Jung. We're doing stuff on Steiner. We're doing stuff on Philip K. Dick, on the Secret Sun Institute of Advanced Synchromysticism. I've developed this perverse fascination for Elizabeth Clare Prophet. uh, There's something about her I just find really, really interesting, even though objectively she was rather insane. But who isn't, right? So yeah, so we're doing. We've done a couple really good things with Steiner and Jung.
Well, all right, sir. If it needs mentioning, people can find you at where exactly?
Oh, secretsun.blogspot.com, and just look me up on Twitter.
You can say X.
Secret Sun Speaks. I don't say X.
I do.
I refuse to say X. That is terrible branding. I don't get it, man. I don't know what he's thinking. He's such a weird dude, though. But yeah, just Secret Sun Speaks or at Secret Sun Blog. I'm pretty easy to find. I'm pretty productive. I've left my little Johnny Appleseeds all over the internet, so I'm not
Very
too hard
good.
to find.
Well, congratulations on the book. It was a good rigorous read. It's exactly what I wanted. It's exactly the book that I was expecting that one day you would write. So thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Were you really thinking that I would be able to put it together in a rational and
Well, speaking
organized
of
and
David Icke, this book was either going to be like a 950-page lion on the cover, meandering, and then this happened once when I was 14, or it was going to be the actual title, like, this is what it is. This is how you do it. This is how you don't do it. This is what happens to you when you do it, and that's quite good. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well done. He went down the route of parsimony, and we're all the better for it.
yeah, I'm a big believer in the law of parsimony. So.
Very good. Well,
And
all right. Once again, sir.
I don't think it's anathema to magic or mysticism.
Absolutely not.
And that is if again if there's any takeaway that you get from all this blather here, the law of parsimony is, or and also like you said, stay in your lane. Limitations can be strengths when you're dealing with forces far beyond your control. So
I like that we crossed the 2 hour mark, and you're like, I'm a big fan of parsimony. All right, sir. Thank you very much for your time. Always a pleasure to chat.
thank you, sir.